Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and today we are talking to Roy MacGregor, who is an author. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you might remember the Screeching Owls series. This was not just a book series, but it was also a series on YTV. Or if you're a little bit older, you might know him from some of his books like Canoe Country and other novels that he's produced around the outdoors. He has one on Tom Thompson, which we did have a previous episode of the Backroads Bill podcast on as well. And actually has a cool connection to that. We talk about it a little bit in this episode. He's also been a longtime journalist for Macleans, and he's done a lot of work, 18 years of journalism for the Globe and Mail. So well respected in many fields, whether it's political or he's done a lot of hockey coverage, and he's also done a lot of screenwriting and authoring fiction novels, which is really cool. So we're going to dive into all of that stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about the World Juniors. We recorded this on January 6th, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Trudeau stuff that came just basically right after we finished recording. So all of that on the way. But first, if you are a first-time listener or a long-time listener of the Backroads Bill podcast, we just want to remind you to give us a follow, a like, to subscribe to this podcast. It's all free, and it just allows us to continue doing the work and continue to get amazing guests like Roy on a weekly basis for you to continue to grow this show. And it helps us attract sponsors, including today's title sponsor, North Bay Toyota. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota. Attention truck lovers, have you been Tundra struck? The powerful and dependable Toyota Tundra is the new definition of grit. Ask us about amazing lease deals on a 2025 Tundra Double Cap SR 4-wheel drive and experience ingenious levels of capability, technology, and refinement. Or maybe you're an SUV lover? Take advantage of a limited shipment of 2025 RAV4s and discover the perfect blend of style, comfort, and efficiency in a compact SUV that ignites your desire to explore. Right now, get excellent lease deals on the Toyota RAV4 LE all-wheel drive and more. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota, 640 McEwen, or online at northbaytoyota.com for details. Well, 2025 on the Backroads Bill podcast so far has been a big year for guests that we've gotten on. We started things off on New Year's Day with Mikkel Alland, who is a sauna expert and does work around the world with sauna aid and helping countries and people in need. Last week, we had Ian Tamblyn on, who is a Canadian folk music icon. And this week, we have, I would say, another Canadian icon in the print media world and renowned author, Roy MacGregor. Roy, welcome to the show. Now, I know, Bill, you're ready to go because you've got about 1 million notes on the table right now, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to have Roy on the Backroads Bill podcast for so many reasons, and that's really an indication of the diversity of his writing. I'm sure someday someone will look back and do their PhD thesis on Roy MacGregor and the diversity from screenplays, television series, novels, of course, the never-ending columns in major national newspapers, so on and so forth. Right. So again, welcome. And of course, there's always a kind of a theme to the Backroads, and we're going to talk to Roy about many things, but the canoeing and that whole aspect of his life, because and I think maybe that's the first question, Roy. When I was looking at everything, and I thought, well, I'm going to try to ask him some unusual questions as I do to all the guests, but what's the connection between the wilderness writing in the canoe and your vocation? Because some of that avocation and vocation gets all mixed up, and I mean it's all about writing. But how did all that start? Or is there a connection when you write a column with regards to when you write about canoeing and wilderness?
Well, sure, there's a connection, Bill. I would suggest stories that I could actually pretend weren't work, but it's not even like the Globe and Mail let me do a series on the rivers of Canada. That was a gift, not only a gift of an assignment, but Bill, they paid all the expenses. My wife Ellen and I went all over the country paddling and in boats and just journeying along the rivers, and it was all picked up. The thing I miss most about being retired is the expense account, no doubt.
Well, was that is in and around about 2016, 2017. This book, Original Highways, and Canoe Country, another one of Roy's. Around about that time, they were kind of in short order, I think, Roy. But I think that's one of your editors said to you about MacGregor luck. So I think that story is about MacGregor luck. But tell us a story again. I think it's in, one note I made about it in Canoe Country was and of course it goes back to 2007, Ben, when the Seven Wonders of the World on the CBC and Roy was on there, and he made this statement: no canoe, no Canada, and made the pitch to have the canoe as the Canadian icon. But Roy, tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, it had a bit of a bad bit to it too, because we had to whittle down to 7 or 3 panelists, and we were doing it on the national. And I'm the guy who killed off the sleeping giant. It had actually more votes almost than anything. And the people of Thunder Bay were justifiably somewhat outraged. I had to go up to Thunder Bay shortly after that, and I was met at the airport by a film crew and people carrying pitchforks. It was unbelievable. But I wanted to come up with something that wasn't really located anywhere but was still Canada. So I thought, oh my God, the canoe. The canoe is a symbol of Canada, one of the wonders of Canada, and it's everywhere in various forms, as you know, Bill. But that won the day, and so it became actually the kind of #1 symbol of Canada.
Yeah, and in Canoe Country, one of my favorite stories, and in Roy's citation to the Order of Canada, he says one of Canada's storytellers and the like. But in this book, I like the story about Khartoum and the siege by the British and having to engage voyageurs to come over and be part of the brigade, so to speak. And then also I followed up, and there's a plaque on the river in Ottawa about this. But tell us a little about that story, because that's again about Canadian heritage in the canoe, and it's one of those things. What are you talking about?
Well, the Khartoum, they had captured the British general, Gordon, and Chinese Gordon, he was known as at the time. In 1885, it was really the very first military expedition for Canada. What we did was we sent over an expedition to rescue Chinese Gordon. And how they gathered up these people was they didn't send soldiers. They took people from North Bay to Pembroke to Ottawa who were experts at running the rivers, because they had to go up the Nile, and the Nile was very difficult. They knew that. And so they got these experts who knew how to work the big boats, took them over to England, built boats where they were there, and then they shipped them off to the Nile. Oh, I should add one thing in. On the way to get there, they had overnights in Montreal, overnights in Quebec City, overnights in Sydney, and they tended to get so drunk that they finally just wouldn't let them go off the ship. And some of them ended up in jail. So, oh my God, there were some stories. They get over there and they mastered the Nile, but they did not get there in time to save Gordon. Nonetheless, they came back to Ottawa, all 180 of them, whatever. They held parades up and down Square Street. Some of them brought monkeys, parakeets, all kinds of creatures from the area that they'd been at. They were quite the scene. And now there is, as you say, that plaque along the Ottawa River. But it's a story that nobody in Canada has ever known about, and I cannot believe that no one's ever done a movie about it.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that, and that kind of leads me to a new topic. But you were born in Whitney, grew up in Huntsville, and of course the English teacher saved your life, so to speak, and set you on your career in writing. But this book here is one of my favorites because I've been to the two graves of Tom Thomson. Roy's also written a novel about this. But again, you grew up in the wilderness environment. You grew up in the canoe, and I always look at that picture of you in the canoe that's been used in a couple of your books, paddling. But tell us about really the relationship that you wanted to write about in the novel and this book about Tom Thomson.
Well, I grew up, Bill, with the story of Tom Thomson for two reasons. One was my grandfather, Tom McCormick, was the chief ranger of Algonquin Park. And of course, Algonquin Park and Tom Thomson are synonymous. My grandfather also knew Tom Thomson. He thought him a lazy bum, did not care for him at all, thought he drank and swore, which are two things my grandfather did not do. But also, my grandfather's brother, Roy, after whom I'm named, he married Marie Traynor. And Marie Traynor's sister Winifred lived just down the street from us, and she would often come and visit us, and she would come to visit us at the cottage. And she was a real force of nature. But she had been, in family lore at least, engaged to Tom Thompson. They were supposed to get married. There were various letters seen by the people at the lodge where Tom was saying, say to Tom, that you had to get money back that you had loaned someone. You know, you have to get a suit, we have to get married, basically, all that kind of stuff. And Winifred, after Tom died, Winifred and her mother left to spend the winter in various places, mostly Philadelphia, where Marie had been training as a nurse. And she came back not until Easter of the following year. So anybody could do the math and say, if in fact there was a baby coming, that baby could have been born and given up, or maybe did not survive. Who knows? Or there was no baby. I tried to prove it, and I couldn't get anywhere with the authorities in Pennsylvania. They just would not release any information. If they had any information, they may not have had any. Anyway, I grew up with the story. We all went to public schools in Ontario where these paintings were on the wall, the West Wind, you know, Northern River and that. And the idea that Tom Thompson had been around Huntsville always fascinated me. And I grew fascinated with him, and unlike my grandfather, I didn't dislike him. I came to quite admire him. He was kind of the, original rock star, maybe.
He was indeed. He was a character. And that kind of, I wanted to go now into that, the vocational part of your career as a journalist. And in the preamble to the paper trails, kind of your memoirs, that, and I have not read that. I'm going to get to that, but I've read the preface and some of the. There was a good chunk of writing that I could look at. That relationship you had with Chief Billy Diamond. I think you were 21 when you went into northern Quebec and did a tainted water story, and then years later, when the failed Charlottetown Accord came about, and you had that kind of clandestine meeting with Elijah Harper. But I was thinking last night, were we wrong when we came to a national referendum, and people are going to have to review the history and that time of the end of actually Brian Mulroney's career in 1992, and then I think he resigned in 93. Were we wrong then that we I think 54% voted against it, 57% of Quebecers, but all those things, and again, it was about the self-government. One of the bullets was one of the self-governmance by the Indigenous people. Were we wrong at that particular time in history when we look back 33 years?
We may have been. I was certainly against it, but it was a case, and it's very similar to today. Canada, for whatever reason, we're far more adept at throwing people out of office than we are of putting people into office. The classic example was throwing David Peterson out of office and accidentally electing Paul Bray, the Premier of Ontario. But we're seeing that happen right now with Justin Trudeau. People are just tired of him. At that point, people were very tired of Mulroney. And so I think that really the vote about Charlottetown had less to do with what was in the pact than what was about the person who was presented it. After the pact died and Mulroney resigned, I did the Spicer Commission. We were all around the country, and I worked very hard on that. And Spicer eventually came to the conclusion that people didn't think he would come to, and basically he talked about a fury that had just captured this land, and it was just inescapable, and it had everything to do with people being fed up. And so you talked about the actual content of the Charlottetown Accord. I don't know whether we can ever go back and look at it. There were some very good things in it, of course.
Your relationship with Chief Billy Diamond, Elijah Harper, did you foresee, I mean, that was pre-Truth and Reconciliation, could you see this was going to continue to evolve as it has to this day?
No, it's been very interesting, and now I guess I can say this, I'm helping the Governor General with her book. She's doing a memoir, and that's all about reconciliation and how far we've come and how far we've yet to go. And so in Billy Diamond's case, we met so early on. He was such a young chief, and he came down to Ottawa, and the CBC wouldn't listen to him, the CTV wouldn't listen to him. He came to Macleans. The receptionist said, there's a person out here who won't leave the office until he meets with someone, so I met with him. And that's when they told me that they had struck the James Bay Agreement. They had all these millions of dollars. The provincial and federal government had come up to the villages on James Bay, and they were putting in sewers and all that kind of thing. And then Ottawa and Quebec City got one of their hissy fits. They got in a fight and they stopped work. Well, what happened was the water system wasn't completed, and so the people had to return to outhouses through the winter. After the winter sludge melted and that, it ran down into those holes that had already been dug, and it ended up in the well system. The women had been told, because they now had television and that, they were told that modern women breastfeed. No longer breastfeed, they feed bottle feed babies. So they were bottle feeding their babies formula using the water from the tainted wells. And, 8 kids came down with the third world disease, gastroenteritis, and one died and then another died. Billy's own son, Philip, was in the Montreal Children's Hospital for 128 days. He did survive, and he's still with us. But it was such a story. It ended up going to the United Nations, being tabled in Parliament, and all because nobody would listen to this guy.
Well, we're going to take a quick break from Roy. Lots more on the way, including we're going to be talking a little bit about the World Juniors, some of his what he's noticed in the last little bit, what he thought about the previous World Juniors, which just ended. Again, we talked to him on January. Well, this was recorded on January the 6th, so it was fresh off of the World Juniors. And, hockey, obviously a staple of Northern Ontario and Canada as a whole. So many kids grow up playing hockey, so many, and that bleeds into the adult life with the beer leagues and everything like that. So if you're somebody whose kid is going to be playing hockey and you're looking for equipment, or if, as an adult, you're looking to get into the game, consider going to today's sponsor, which is North Bay Source for Sports. And they do an absolutely fantastic job. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially if you don't know a lot about the equipment that you need, because hockey takes a lot of equipment. But their team does an amazing job making sure that you get exactly what you need. That they just want to get your kid on the ice and make sure that they're having a fantastic time. And that's really what their team is all about. It's about getting people on. They have a huge community impact. They really are focusing on the customer experience over where in today's world, a lot of times it tends to be more about profit and more about capitalism. And Source for Sports is really about community and getting your kids, not just hockey, but any sport, getting your kid or yourself the equipment they need with their very good team. So again, team absolutely fantastic and passionate about what they do. So the next time you need any sort of sporting need, whether it's hockey or a different sport, consider visiting Paul and his team at 1321 Fisher Street in North Bay so they can help you along your way.
North Bay Echo is proud to partner with Twigs Coffee Roasters, a part of the community since 1995. Twigs offers a wide selection of quality beans, fresh roasted in-house every day. Find your favorite specialty drinks at our espresso bar, rejuvenate with freshly squeezed juice, or treat yourself to mouth-watering selections from our gourmet deli. And don't forget our irresistible fresh baked goods, including uncompromising gluten-free options. Twigs has 5 locations to serve you, from North Bay to Sturgeon Falls to Sudbury. Order online for pickup at twigs.ca. And coming soon, you'll be able to order fresh roasted coffee beans direct to your doorstep from our distribution center in North Bay.
Right now, we're recording this on January 6th, and it's about 10:15 in the morning. In about 30 minutes, Trudeau is supposed to make an announcement. Roy, just because you're so ingrained in that political world, you wear so many different hats. And we've went from the author and the outdoors to the political, and we'll talk about hockey in a little bit. But I just wanted to get your thoughts a little bit on the Trudeau stuff and kind of what you're expecting to see and what you're kind of hoping to see.
Well, before he ran for politics, the Globe and Mail sent me off to do a profile on him. And so I spent a long time hanging out with him and going to universities and that. And I was struck by how friendly he was and how well-spoken he was. And of course, I'd been to his father's funeral, in which he'd basically come onto the national scene. I remember that speech, which people say was the great speech, but it really wasn't. Anyway, I came home from that assignment, and my wife Ellen said to me, she said, "What's he like?" I said, "Well, obviously he's good looking and everybody likes him and he's very friendly and that." I said, "But he's 39 years old and it's like talking to your child who's just come home from university or college, first Thanksgiving. The naivety, I said, the naivety is just astonishing. And I think, looking back now in retrospect, the naivety has been his downfall. Not failing to read the room and certain things, whether it was going to the Aga Khan's place, going surfing on the first day of national reconciliation, hiring those wee people to give out the money, early money in COVID. Just a naivety that he needed that person or these people there who could read rooms better than he was reading them and say, no, Prime Minister, don't do that. Because some of the stuff he did has been very, very good. In history, it will be looked upon quite kindly. But at the moment, this is Canada. We throw people out. We don't put people in. And people want to throw them out or they'll leave.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. We don't want to get like too super political because that's not really what this show's about.
No.
But it is kind of interesting. So just like your time in print media, maybe you can just talk a little bit about how did you get into the print media world and how going from something like the novels you've written about the canoeing and these other things, getting into the print media world, what was it? There like a shock factor into it a little bit, or how different was it?
Well, it was a dream, and Bill had made reference earlier to the teacher who saved my life, basically. I had failed grade 12 terribly. The principal at Huntsville High School met with me and told me that his advice was that I stay out of school for a year and think about what I wanted to do, and if I wanted to come back, I'd have to come back and talk to him and convince him to let me back in. The English teacher came to the meeting, and he asked if he could intervene, and yes, and he said, I'd like Roy to be able to go back to school in the fall, and I've got an idea for him. I had 53% in English, the one course I passed, by the way. He said, I want to start a student magazine, and I want him to be the editor of it. Made no sense at all to me whatsoever, but I was so keen and so excited. A new girl moved into town from St. Catharines because her father had come to teach there. Her name was Ellen. She ended up being the business manager of the magazine. We were married for 49 years after that. So everything happened at one point. I just kind of fell into it, loved it. And once I got out, I went to journalism school. And then after that, I started working for Macleans magazine and the weekend supplement magazines. Then I switched over to newspapers after a while, and I've loved it. My best job would have been at the Globe and Mail, 18 years at the Globe and Mail.
So one of the interesting things too about obviously where media has evolved, and that's part of like where podcasting has kind of come in. What is your take on the current world of not just print media, but media in general, and kind of where you think it's going to go, and maybe some of the stuff you like about it and you don't like about it?
Well, I certainly don't like social media. I see Elon Musk, who is basically the president of the United States these days, saying that legacy media is dead and that X is now the legacy media of the world. Well, that's BS, of course. I mean, there's so much misinformation, disinformation, and outright lies on X that you cannot say that, for all its flaws, the legacy media, the newspapers that we have known and that, and the radio and the television, and the CBC, they do as good a job as they can. They're not perfect. It's easy to criticize, no doubt about that. But I'm a great believer in the truth, and I'm a great believer in analysis and common sense, and I think that they will win. Now, newspapers are vanishing. We can see that evidence every single day. And a lot of things are changing quickly. Podcasts didn't exist up until just a few years ago. And so the media is different. It's evolving. But the truth is not changing. And the truth is still worth seeking.
Very poignant.
Well, Roy, I wanted to go back to, you've received 2 ATRA awards, one in 1978 and one later on. And this diversity of writing, which I started out on, and I think the history will show that you are Canada's most diverse writer, because writing screenplays for television series, and I know, for instance, when I've had to do some commercials and write dialogue, and you have to switch over to that part of your brain. How did you do that? And I think in the one series, I don't know if it's Soldier, but it's set in East London. How did you write that too? But just that whole aspect. How do you go from being a columnist to writing a dialogue in a screenplay?
Well, I had written a novel, I guess at that point. Yeah, one novel at that point on Tom Thompson. And so the dialogue kind of came to me easily, but I did not for a second ever think about writing screenplays. I'd written a story about a farmer who was losing his farm and was worried that his children wouldn't be able to take over. And I got a call from the CBC saying they'd like to turn this into a script for television, and would I be interested in writing it? And I said, well, I've never done it before. I've never even seen a script. They said, well, we'll work with you. And they did work with me. They had me do it. They had an actor lined up that had never appeared in a show before. And R.H. Thompson, he turned out to be one of the great actors of Canada. And the show won a bunch of awards, much to my shock, and I kept doing it after that because it was good money, but it was also fun.
Well, I want to switch over to the hockey, Ben, because I know you've got some questions about that. But a couple of quotes, you've been described as the Wayne Gretzky of hockey writing, but this Washington Post quote, the closest thing there is to a poet laureate of hockey. So what happened to the Canadian junior team and what needs to happen are the burning questions that listeners and viewers will be wanting to hear your 2 cents about.
Well, I mean, it's such a botched job this year. You do not leave off the 4 best scorers in junior hockey on your team because you don't think they can skate fast enough. I mean, who came up with that one? You do not... I don't really want to savage David Cameron, who's a nice man, but he botched the Buffalo one when he failed to react to the Russians pulling their goalie and causing play. I was at that game and I couldn't believe that he didn't respond in any way. And in this case, he canceled practices, or somebody canceled them, practices and morning skates, and because they were exhausted. Well, come on, these are 17, 18-year-old kids. They weren't exhausted. They needed an outlet. So I think it was very, very, very poorly planned and executed.
How was hockey? I mean, when you first started writing sport, so to speak, and the juniors, I think, are 35 years. I think this year it was 35 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. How has it changed? How has hockey changed? I mean, you do what you have to do. You're reporting and you're analyzing. But how has hockey changed over the years from the original 6 teams to now?
Well, if you did play, and most of us played in this hockey, and you're old enough, you remember the coach telling you, let the goalie see the puck. Commonly said. Well, now the last thing in the world the coach wants to see is the goalie seeing the puck. Goalies were always the littlest guys in the team. Usually they were put in goal because they're the younger brother or whatever. Always little guys like Darren Payne. That Ken Dryden comes along, he's 6'4" and he's an anomaly, but now he would just be common size because the giants are in net now. And it's more like a lacrosse goalie. If the puck gets through, it'll hit the guy and it won't go in. And the other thing that astonishes me is, in my opinion, the stupidest play that has ever been created in hockey, the long drop pass on the power play. You skate up the ice, and just as soon as you're over center ice, you turn around, you fire it back into your own end. Is that supposed to fool someone? Like, who came up with that one? Maybe it worked the first time, but it's comical now to watch. And of course, there are other things that are in play now. That the cross ice pass, the Ovechkin goal, now that's the really common way to score in all levels. And we saw it in the junior tournament too, that's the preferred way of scoring now, versus the old Guy Lafleur or Frank Mahovlich down the wing and fire the rocket. Never happens ever anymore. So the game has fantastically changed.
Yeah, interesting. Ben?
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely with the goalies. Like, I think the goalies have been like the biggest change, because when you look even back in the 90s, goalies were not really that good if you compare them to like where they were in the 2010s and where they are now. There was a lot, like, they didn't do the butterfly and all that kind of stuff. So it was I just want to quickly say this about the World Juniors. The really funny thing was, so obviously the World Juniors just finished. I believe it was Finland who won, right?
No, the United States won.
Did the U.S. come back?
Yeah, they won 4-3.
Yes.
Oh, okay. The last thing I saw was Finland was up at the time. But anyways, so the funny thing about it was Scott Clark, who's obviously the president of this company and also the co-host of Echo Essentials. So this is the second year in a row that he went. Last year he went to Sweden. This year he went to Ottawa. And both times he didn't go until the semifinals, and both times Canada were kicked out by the Czechs, which was just kind of, it was kind of comical on the Friday when that happened, because we were kind of laughing about it, where he's like, I've never seen Canada play yet, because both times they got kicked out in the quarters.
Maybe he's the problem.
Maybe I don't know. But staying with hockey, one of the things I want to talk about was your very long series, the Screech Owls, because I forgot this existed until I was doing some prep work for this show, and I saw this, and it unlocked one of those core memories where I go, I remember this when I was a kid. So, Roy, I just want to know a little bit about kind of where the inspiration for this came, and that idea of having kind of young hockey players who are also like almost like the Hardy Boys of hockey.
Well, I guess it was a little bit my idea, but it was publisher Douglas Gibson, Macleans and Stewart, came to me and he said that they had heard so much from teachers and librarians about what they call the reluctant reader, which is really the boys, of course. And he said, we've been thinking about it, and we think it would be a good idea to produce a series that boys would want to read. And what would boys want to read about in Canada but hockey? And so he put the idea into my head, and they offered me a 3-book contract. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, hockey's not enough. You know, you can write all you want about hockey, but in the end, it's kind of boring. It's just plain hockey. I said, what if I make them into mysteries? And then I got really carried away because I did not think the series would work. I said, well, what if I have some fun with it? What if I make the team of the United Nations of players? I'll have a Muslim on the team. I'll have a Jamaican on the team. I'll have a Russian on the team. I'll make the best player a girl. I'll make the goaltender a girl. And I modeled Travis, the assistant captain, on my own son Gordon and his friends. And they know who they are in the books, like the guy plays Nish and that. And the series just took off. And I won another contract. And then finally I ended up with 29 books in the series, plus a scrapbook, so that's 30 books in total, translated into Finnish, into Swedish, into Czech, into French, into Chinese, or Mandarin, I should say. And all over the world, they sold millions of copies, and they still sell. And they did a TV series for a couple of years, but the kids grew up so fast.
It's kind of funny when you look at it, though, and you think about all the stuff that you've done, all of the political, the outdoor stuff. It's like, this is the thing that has like I'm assuming has the most renown and it's probably sold the most, right? It's just kind of funny.
I'll be remembered for a series that I didn't myself believe in.
Yeah, it's funny how that life
That's
works.
more of the MacGregor luck, so to speak.
I think so, yes. But.
Well, I know time's going on, but back to canoe country, and on page 101, I just wanted to start because we can't leave without a Mattawa River or another canoe story. But on page
We've
101,
been there.
Yeah, I'll start you off here. It was the Talon, it was the Talon Portage where I witnessed firsthand what difficult terrain and overexertion can do to someone on an ostensibly relaxing canoe trip. We had our mind set on a campsite a few hours downstream, a lovely spot with a small waterfall chuckling behind a flat sand beach, perfect for pitching tents, which is, I think, Elm Point.
Yep.
And then tell that story.
Oh, about the guy?
Yeah.
Well, there's quite a portage, and as you know, because you know it better than anybody, you have to climb quite a hill, and Ellen and I are taking our time. I've got the canoe, she's got packs on and that. And we hear this rattling behind us, and I turn around, and this guy's running with a canoe on, and his poor partner's behind him trying to keep up. And he's saying, come on, we got to go. And what he meant was, we've got to pass these old people here because we've got to reach that perfect campsite. And he goes up the hill, and he's trying to look ahead, and he leans the canoe back. And I don't know whether the wind caught it or what, Bill, but suddenly the canoe just turned around, and it flopped right back over and went back on the hill. He lost his canoe. He almost went with it. And we ended up being the guys who got the good campsite.
Now, paper trails. Is there more to be written after paper trails, Roy?
I don't know. As I said earlier, I was doing helping the Governor General, and she's an amazing story. What an amazing woman. And then after that, I don't know. You start to thinking, should you write another book? I know I've seen people, I've got to be careful how I say this, I've seen people who write books who maybe shouldn't have because they waited too long. And, I shouldn't say any names, but there's been some memoirs out there that have not been what they should have been.
Well, you have so many stories to tell. I was thinking too, and Ben, we've had Roy at the Canadian Ecology Centre for a book talk, and I have to have him back up for another book talk. I hope, or just get into canoe with Roy. It would. And I remember the day we paddled with Ellen down the river, and really great scenery, and when you're paddling along, you look over and you're looking over at one of Canada's foremost authors, again, with such diversity. It's the diversity that really always, when you look back at that, everything you've done, the 60 books, that it's quite incredible, because often when when people are asked about Canada's foremost authors, and whether they're historic authors or Robson Davies or the like, Roy MacGregor has to be in that list. But I think you had some other questions, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to end things off as we're getting close to this Trudeau announcement. We want to make sure you're there, Roy, to hear it. One of the things I like asking people, especially people who have done as much as you have, what is the thing in your life that you've done that you're the most proud of?
Been a good husband and father and grandfather. Absolutely. Much more than the literary stuff.
Yeah, for the literary stuff. And I should have shoehorned this one thing about the interview you had with Mordecai Richler, when he was just, every time he got to half a beer, he ordered another beer. And then when he had to do the real interview, he brought along 2 bottles of wine. Tell us a little bit about that, speaking of Canadian authors.
Well, we met he wanted to meet at the press club, and it's such a bizarre story. Macleans assigned me, a small-town Protestant boy, to go off to Montreal to write about the Jewish experience in Montreal, and why they chose me, I don't know. So Mordecai said he'd meet me at the press club, and I went to the press club, and he started drinking beer, and then he bought 2 bottles of Remy Martin on the way back to where we were to do the real interview. And I had my tape recorder. First time I'd ever carried a tape recorder in Macleans. It just picked up a few, and I had one. And so we had the talk, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. I didn't even get under the covers. I'm wearing my clothes, and I'm hungover like anything. And I'm freaking out because I can't find my notepads. I can't find anything, but I see the tape recorder. I go over, I push the rewind, and then I push the play. And his voice comes over, clears anything, and in the background, there's this guy every once in a while going, "Is that all right? Holy Jesus! What? Why is it? You said what?" He clears a bell, so I had the interview, and it saved my skin.
Your favorite canoe trip, just before we leave, or one of the favorite canoe trips, maybe by context or by the company or a bit of both?
Yeah. Well, 2. One was, going with Wally Shaber and his beloved Des Moines. Mm-hmm. The other, for sure, I'm very, very fond of the Petawawa. It's just such a wonderful river to paddle. And I guess if there's one other thing, and you know about this, Bill, because I've talked about it, and if I had one place to go, you know where it is. It's along the Barron Canyon, and I would go into High Falls, and I would just glorify in the most beautiful setting I think Canada has.
Yes, and thank you for contributing to one of my print stories. It's no longer print, but Village Media. I asked people that I knew, like Hap Wilson, like Roy MacGregor, Adam Schultz, and Roy recounted that story about the High Falls and the Barron Canyon. So it was a secret, and no longer a secret, I guess. But I think people will have to strike out and find the High Falls on the Barron Canyon.
Absolutely.
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
For sure. Thanks, Roy, so much for joining us today. And I'm sure there's more stories to tell. Maybe we'll have you back on again.
I hope so. It's always worth it to speak with Roy because he's the storyteller.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, Roy is a busy man. We have been trying to get him on the podcast for the better part of a year. And we finally got our schedules lined up. So thank you, Roy, for fitting us into your schedule. It was a fantastic conversation from a man who wears so many different hats. Not just is he an author, not just is he a journalist in the political world, and also the sports. He does a lot of writing for the Ottawa Senators in the Ottawa area. Again, it was so awesome to have him on and be able to talk about all these different things. So if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find new episodes every single Wednesday on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, you can find the video version on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and everything is available on our website, NorthBayEcho.ca. We also have a lot of other great community podcasts under the Echo Community Podcast Network umbrella for whatever you're interested in. It could be a little slice of life here in the Bay with our show To North Bay with Love. It could be maybe you're interested in the political and community issues in our city. We have that covered with Echo Essentials. And speaking of sports, because we have talked about sports a little bit in this episode here, the Echo Sportscast is your place for local sports coverage. We cover high school, university, rec, most of the major stuff that happens in our city on every single Friday morning. So you can check that out if you are into the sports world and you want to stay in tune with what's going on in North Bay. So that does it for us. Keep yourself glued to the Backroads Bill podcast as we have many more amazing guests lined up over the next coming weeks. And Bill and I will be back next Wednesday for another Backroads adventure.